Good morning. Happy Monday. I hope everybody is having a great start to their week. My name is Courtney Mobley, in case we don't know each other, and today is March the 10th. So our reading for today is from the very end of the book of Numbers. We're doing chapter 35 and 36, getting ready to head into Deuteronomy tomorrow. So let's just do a quick recap of what those books or those chapters are about. So in chapter 35, we see the first part of the chapter is setting up the details for how the Lord is going to make sure that the Levites have land or cities given to them or distributed to them. So he's kind of giving the details for how that's to be coming from the different tribes. And then we see him talk just briefly in there about those cities of refuge. And then that's kind of what we're discussing, or what he discusses through the rest of chapter 35. So the cities of refuge, he's giving details on what those are. So we get into some details where the Lord is laying out different instances in which someone has lost their life. So, and the details for multiple times, all the breakdowns of ways that it would be considered murder, and where the person would then have to pay with their life. And then the instances in which someone has still lost their life, but the person may not be considered a murderer necessarily. Something where maybe it happened in the heat of the moment, or an accident has occurred, versus someone who lay in wait and intentionally took the life of another. And so those people, the people who do not meet the statute or the conditions that would be considered murder, the Lord is granting them these cities of refuge. So they cannot leave those cities. That kind of serves as a consequence for their action, because something still has to be done because a life has been taken. But because they are able to stay in these cities of refuge until the high priest dies, they do not have to pay with their life. They are allowed to exist the rest of this time within one of these 6 cities of refuge. Then we're going to move into chapter 36. Chapter 36 has to do with, again, kind of land and how that's distributed. So this is coming out of the descendants of Manasseh, and talking about how they believe daughters should be able to inherit from fathers who did not have any sons. And they say, yes, that's true. Daughters should be able to inherit. But then the question arises, well, what happens to their land if they are to marry outside of their tribe? Because daughters with inherited land, the land goes with them and now belongs to their husband. So now the rule is given in this chapter that they must marry within their tribe, so that land isn't being taken from or moved from one tribe to another. Just real quick, I want to just tell you something I notice about God in these chapters, and kind of have noticed throughout many of the chapters in the books that we've been reading up till this point. And I think that you notice a lot just throughout these first several books of the Old Testament, and that is that God is a God of order and details. He has, you can see through chapter 35, he's laying out very specific details for the different instances that would be considered murder. But I think you also see that God is a God of justice. He has a system in place for payment to be given, whether it's with the life of the person who has committed the murder, or through existing the rest of their life in one of these cities of refuge. But there is justice administered here that you get to see. And then I think just the biggest thing that I notice amongst all of this, and that I think you see several times throughout the Old Testament, is that ultimately God is a God of holiness. He cannot exist in and amongst this sin. And I just find that all very encouraging, that the Lord is holy and just. So if you look at chapter 35, the last verse of the chapter, verse 34, it says, "You shall not defile the land in which you live, in the midst of which I dwell. For I, the Lord, dwell in the midst of my people of Israel." So we see that what he's getting at here is, if the land is defiled with the blood, that I cannot be there, because he is holy and he cannot be in the middle of the sin and the darkness. So I hope that's encouraging to you today. I find it very encouraging to see God's holiness, even in the middle of what kind of sounds like maybe some icky chapters, like we're reading about murder and death, right? But ultimately, I see there at the end of the chapter 35 that the Lord is holy. And I find that encouraging in the middle of just a lot of details laid out there. So I hope that's encouraging you today as we wrap up Numbers, and I'm looking forward to continuing to read with you all.